My wife pulled into what should have been our driveway, but something was wrong. The gravel crunched under her tires as she slowed to a crawl, her heart starting to race. She blinked hard, hoping her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, there was no trailer. No home, just an empty patch of earth and a few scattered tire tracks. The yard where our old silver Dodge Ram 1500 should have been parked sat bare. The swing I built from an oak tree for weekend cookouts swayed slightly in the Tennessee breeze, creaking like it was mocking her confusion. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed me. Straight to voicemail. Again and again. Next, she tried my parents. They didn't know where I was or where the trailer had gone. No one had seen me. Nobody knew anything. She slumped back in her seat, gripping the steering wheel. A chill ran down her spine. And then it hit her. This was about her. About what she had done. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind to the moment when this whole thing began. Back to the day a casual question from an acquaintance cracked my world wide open and set off a chain of events I never saw coming. It was a Tuesday, one of those hot, sticky Tennessee summers where you sweat through your shirt before noon. The air in the garage smelled of motor oil and burnt rubber. I was elbow-deep in the engine of an old 1979 Chevy C10, one of those jobs you take on because you love the truck more than the paycheck. I worked at Knox Auto Service, a small family-run shop on the outskirts of Knoxville. It was the kind of place where grease stained your hands and country music hummed softly from a dusty old radio in the corner. That's when Mike Henderson, a buddy of mine from work, strolled over. Mike was one of those guys who could talk your ear off about the Vols' last game, or the best catfish spot in the county. Always friendly, but that day his brow was furrowed like he was chewing on something he wasn't sure he should say. "Hey, Chris," Mike started, wiping his hands on a rag. "Y'all switch cars or something?" I straightened up, wiping sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. "What do you mean?" "Well," he said, shifting awkwardly, "I could have sworn I saw Ashley driving this black Ford Fusion pullin' into that old Sunset motel off Interstate 40 yesterday. Thought maybe you rented something, or she was running an errand for you." My stomach dropped. We didn't own a Ford Fusion. We'd only ever had her white Toyota Camry in my truck. I tried to play it cool, but something was already knotting tight in my chest. "You sure it was her?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Mike squinted, like he was replaying the scene. "Man, if it wasn't her, it was her twin. I even noticed the UT Vols sticker in the back window, just like you got on the Camry. But, hey, maybe it was a friend or something." I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, could be." But my gut said otherwise. The rest of the day dragged. My hands went through the motions, but my mind was miles away, chasing shadows and questions I couldn't answer. By the time I got home to our trailer out near Cherokee Lake, the sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. Ashley was already there, humming in the kitchen with a glass of sweet tea in hand. She flashed me her usual warm smile. "Hey, baby, how was work?" I studied her. Same soft eyes, same easy charm. But suddenly, there was something behind it I couldn't read. "Same old," I replied, my voice tight. "Hey, you, been out by Interstate 40 recently?" She paused, her hand still on the fridge door. "Interstate 40? Nah. Why?" The lie came quick. Too quick. I shook my head, forcing a grin. "Mike thought he saw you out that way. Must have been someone else." She chuckled lightly, but her eyes flickered, just for a second. "Well, you know how many brunettes drive a Camry in Knoxville. Poor Mike probably needs glasses." But my gut wouldn't let it go. I could feel it, the kind of feeling you get when a storm's coming but the sky's still blue. Something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the cracked ceiling of our trailer, Ashley breathing softly beside me. My mind was a mess of half-finished thoughts. I told myself I was crazy. Maybe Mike was wrong. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But then I remembered the sticker. That damn UT Vols sticker. The one we put on her car together after a game 2 years back. Nobody else had one quite like it, with the little tear on the corner from where it peeled wrong. I got up, my heart thudding, and slipped into the living room. My old laptop hummed to life as I searched Sunset Motel, Knoxville. It was a real dive. $49.99 a night, pay by the hour. the kind of place that smelled like stale smoke and bad decisions. I sat there for a long time, the screen glowing in the dark. Finally, I closed the laptop and rubbed my hands over my face. The next morning, the sun was barely up when I headed to the garage. But I wasn't going to work, not yet. I swung by a local electronics store and picked up a small GPS tracker. Nothing fancy, just something that would tell me where that Camry went when I wasn't in it. By the time I rolled back into the driveway, Ashley was just leaving for work, the Camry kicking up dust. She waved from the window, and I waved back, my face a mask. I went inside and sat on the couch, my hands clasped tight, the little tracker resting on my palm. My heart pounded as I thought about what I was about to do. I hated myself for it, but I hated the unknown even more. The minutes ticked by, but finally, I got up, walked outside, and carefully placed the device under the rear bumper. It clicked into place with a small magnetic snap. The rest of that day felt like it lasted a year. My phone sat on the workbench, and every time it buzzed with a notification from the tracker app, my heart jumped. But each time, the car was exactly where it should be, her office, the grocery store, our driveway. But that evening, just after 7:30 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Ashley's car had taken a sudden turn. I glanced down at the screen, and my blood ran cold. Sunset Motel, Interstate 40. I felt my pulse in my ears, a hard, steady drumbeat. My knuckles went white as I gripped the phone, my chest burning with something I couldn't even name. Rage, dread, disbelief. I stood there in the middle of the garage, the air thick with the smell of motor oil and hot metal, and felt the ground shift beneath me. That was the moment. The exact second everything I thought I knew about my life shattered. The countdown had started, and there was no stopping what came next. The house was dead quiet, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I sat on the couch, my knee bouncing like a jackhammer, phone in hand, staring at the tracker app. Ashley's white Toyota Camry was parked where it should be, right outside. The little dot on the map hadn't moved all evening, but something felt wrong. I couldn't shake the way her eyes flickered when I mentioned Interstate 40, or how quick she was to brush it off. We'd been together for years. I knew when she was hiding something. I needed someone to talk to, someone I could trust. I picked up the phone and called Derek Moore, my best friend since high school. Derek and I had been through thick and thin. He served with the Marines for 8 years, 2 tours overseas, before coming back to Tennessee and working private security. The guy knew more about surveillance and tracking than anyone I'd ever met. The phone barely rang before he answered. Chris. His voice was steady as ever. Hey man, I said, trying to sound calm. You busy? Just polishing my old rifle, he joked. What's up? I paused. I think Ashley's hiding something from me. Derek was silent for a second. You want to talk? Or you want me to come over? Come over. 15 minutes later, Derek's old black Chevy Silverado rumbled up the driveway. He stepped out, built like a rock, wearing a USMC ball cap, jeans, and a flannel. Same old Derek. No nonsense, no judgment. Just there when you needed him. We sat on the porch, the cool night air heavy with the smell of pine and the distant hum of crickets. I told him everything. What Mike said, the motel, the sticker, my gut feeling, and how I'd put a tracker on her car. When I finished, he rubbed his jaw. You did the right thing calling me, he said. If she's hiding something, we'll find out. If she's not, well, better to know than wonder. The next day felt like it lasted a damn lifetime. Ashley was her usual self, smiling, laughing, even asked if I wanted to grill out that weekend. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe Mike had just been wrong. But that evening, while I was working on the truck, she popped her head out. Hey, baby, she said, keys jingling in her hand. I'm meeting the girls for dinner. I'll probably be late, so don't wait up. My stomach twisted. Where y'all going? I asked casually. Some new place over in Maryville, she replied quickly, then kissed my cheek. Love you. I stood there, wiping my hands on an old rag, heart pounding as I watched her pull out in the Camry. Then I felt a hand clap my shoulder. Let's roll, Derek said. He'd parked his truck around the corner and was already ready to go. We hopped into my silver Dodge Ram 1500, and I pulled up the tracker app on the dash. The little dot, Ashley's car, was heading west on Route 140, but she wasn't going toward Maryville. "She's lying," I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. Derek nodded, his eyes sharp. "Keep your distance. She knows your truck too well. Let's stay a mile back and let the GPS do the work." The road stretched ahead of us, dark and empty, only lit by our headlights and the occasional street lamp. We passed familiar landmarks, the old Exxon station, the Sweetwater Diner, and the rundown Valley View Baptist Church with its rusted sign half covered by vines. "She's getting off on Highway 62, I said, glancing at the tracker. My throat felt dry. "That's the way to Oak Ridge." Derek shot me a look. "That's not where any girl's night happens." We stayed back, barely catching glimpses of her Camry's taillights ahead. She passed up restaurants, bars, and every decent spot you'd expect for a night out. Instead, the GPS led us to the edge of town, near a cluster of cheap motels by Pellissippi Parkway, the kind of place folks didn't go to for a meal. "She's pulling into the Greenwood Inn," I said, my voice tight. The place was a dump. Flickering neon sign, cracked parking lot, a couple of old pickups, and a rusted-out Buick with no plates. I eased off the gas, parking behind an old dumpster across the street. From there, we had a clear view of the entrance without being seen. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. "You see her?" I asked, eyes scanning every shadow. Derek pointed. "There. White Camry. She just parked." The driver's door opened, and Ashley stepped out. She wasn't dressed for a girl's night. Tight jeans, black blouse, heels. Not clubbing fancy, but different. She didn't go inside right away. She leaned against the car, checking her phone like she was waiting for someone. And then, a man pulled up. The guy drove a dark blue Ford F-250, newer model. Lifted, tinted windows. He parked 2 spots over from her. The door opened, and out stepped a man I'd never seen before. Tall, stocky, short brown hair. Dressed casual, jeans, boots, and a leather jacket. But it was the way Ashley smiled when she saw him that made my blood turn cold. I felt Derek's hand on my arm. "Easy, Chris," he warned. "We watch. We don't move. Not yet." My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I could barely breathe. The man said something, and she laughed, then walked with him toward a room. Room 14. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back. The door opened. They stepped inside. The door shut. My vision blurred with rage. My body screaming to move, to confront, to demand answers. But Derek's voice cut through the storm in my head. "Chris," he said firmly, "you run in there now. You lose everything. Your freedom. Your answers. Hell, maybe even your life if he's some hothead. You want the truth? You stay put. You let me help you get it the right way." I stared hard at that closed door, every muscle in my body ready to explode. But then I sank back into the seat, my breath shaking. "You're right," I muttered, barely able to get the words out. "But I swear to God this ain't over." We sat there for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Cars passed by on the highway, their headlights sweeping the lot. A couple of guys smoked cigarettes outside the motel office, barely paying attention to anything but their phones. Derek stayed sharp, eyes scanning everything, calm and collected like he was still on a mission overseas. "Chris," he said quietly, "I'll help you get what you need. But we don't let emotion get us killed." I nodded stiffly, my jaw locked so tight it hurt. "I just want to know why," I managed through gritted teeth. "Why lie? Why this?" Finally, the room door opened. Ashley stepped out, her hair a little messy, her expression calm. She and the man just a quick word and a nod. She walked back to her Camry, checking her phone again as if it were just any other night. The man leaned against his truck, watching her leave. "Get his plate," Derek said quickly, lifting his phone and snapping a photo. "Got it. Tennessee tags." Ashley's Camry pulled out of the lot, headlights cutting through the night. I gripped the wheel, my pulse pounding in my ears. "She told me she was meeting friends," I said, my voice raw and low. "But this is what she's doing." Derek's voice stayed steady. "Now we know. But knowing is just step one." I followed the tracker as she headed back toward home, calm as could be, like nothing had happened. I didn't chase. I didn't confront. But something inside me, something that had always trusted her, always believed her, was gone, and something else had taken its place. I gripped the steering wheel harder. This was just the beginning. The sun hadn't even come up when I found myself sitting in my truck outside a Waffle House off Kingston Pike, nursing a cup of black coffee that tasted more like burnt water. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, my knuckles pale. I hadn't slept, not that I could. The events of the night before kept looping through my head like a bad movie. I'd seen enough. But knowing wasn't the same as proving. That's when I decided to call Michael Henshaw, a name I never thought I'd need but had heard plenty about. I'd known about Henshaw through a buddy of mine, Randy Carter, who went through a rough divorce last year. He told me, if you ever find yourself needing the truth, cold, hard, and with receipts, Henshaw's your man. Randy's ex tried to play him for a fool, but Henshaw's work shut that down fast. So, I called him that morning, right there from my truck. The phone rang twice before a low, steady voice answered. Henshaw Investigations. This is Chris Foster, I said, my voice tight. I need your help. An hour later, I met him at his office, a small place on the second floor of an old building near Market Square in downtown Knoxville. The sign on the glass door was simple. Michael Henshaw, Private Investigator. Inside, the place was bare. No fancy leather furniture or polished desks. Just a filing cabinet, a desk covered in papers, and a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. Henshaw himself was a man you wouldn't notice twice in a crowd. Mid-50s, lean, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through you. He wore jeans, a button-down, and a well-worn leather jacket. He didn't waste time on small talk. So, he said, leaning back in his chair, who are we watching, and what do you need? I laid it all out. The tracker, the motel, the lies. I told him about Ashley and the man she met, though I still didn't know his name. Henshaw listened without interrupting, his expression flat, his fingers tapping slowly on the arm of his chair. When I finished, he nodded. You've done the hard part. Now let me get you what you need. The next day, Henshaw got to work. He installed a discreet camera on Ashley's Camry license plate frame, something even I didn't know existed. He told me he'd track her movements and document everything. No speculation, no maybes. Just facts. Give me a week, he said. Maybe less. The first day, nothing unusual. Ashley drove to work at Bradford Realty, then home. She spent the evening scrolling her phone while I sat across from her, pretending I didn't feel my world falling apart. But on day 2, things changed. At 12:15 p.m., Henshaw texted me. She's on the move. Left work early, heading west. My stomach dropped. She hadn't said a word about leaving early. By 1 p.m., Henshaw sent a photo. Ashley, at the Cloverleaf Inn off Highway 95. Meeting the same man, the one from the night before. Henshaw didn't just watch from afar. He got up close without being seen, snapping clear shots of the man. He even followed the guy when he left, catching his plates. That night, Henshaw called me. His name's Brian Carter, works for Summit Realty Group in Oak Ridge. He's a real estate agent. I gripped the phone, my knuckles tight. You're sure? Positive, he replied. And he's not just a fling. They've got a routine. He meets her during the day, usually midweek. And get this, he's married. Wife's name is Rachel Carter, 2 kids. House on Meadowbrook Lane in Oak Ridge. I felt like the world was caving in. So, she's blowing up 2 families, I muttered. Day 4, Henshaw kept at it. More photos, more proof. Brian's white Audi Q5, parked right next to Ashley's Camry at another motel, the Redwood in off Alcoa Highway. Room number 207, both of them entering together. I stared at those photos, my throat burning. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. On day 6, Henshaw caught something else. A different setting. Ashley and Brian at a fancy spot, the Smoky Vine Steakhouse in Gatlinburg. Candlelit dinner, wine glasses clinking, laughing like they hadn't a care in the world. But Henshaw wasn't just snapping photos. He was digging. He sent me a copy of the receipt from our joint credit card. My credit card. $164.78, dinner for 2. a bottle of Pinot Noir, filet mignon and pan-seared trout, and a chocolate lava cake to share. Her name, her signature, paid with our money. I sat in my truck in the driveway, holding that receipt, my hands shaking so hard the paper crinkled. I could barely breathe. She wasn't just betraying me. She was using our life to pay for it. Henshaw called that night. "Chris," he said, his voice steady but firm, "this is everything you need. Photos, videos, dates, times, the receipt. It's all here." I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat felt raw. "Thank you," I managed, my voice hollow. He paused. "I've seen a lot of cases like this," he said, his tone softer, "but I know it doesn't make it hurt any less." I sat there long after we hung up, the photos and the receipt spread across the dashboard. Ashley was inside the house. I could see her through the window, scrolling her phone on the couch like everything was fine. But nothing was fine. I had the truth now, and there was no coming back from it. I sat alone in my truck outside a First National Bank branch on Clinton Highway, the engine humming softly. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass from the landscaping crew trimming the hedges. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel as I stared through the windshield. I knew what I had to do. There was no room for second thoughts. I stepped out, the door groaning on its hinges, and walked into the bank. The cold blast of air conditioning hit me, carrying the faint scent of coffee and printer toner. I nodded politely to the teller, Margaret, who knew me by name. "Morning, Chris," she greeted with a warm smile. "Ashley not with you today?" I felt my chest tighten, but I forced a grin. "Nah, just me. Got some account stuff to take care of." I approached the desk of David Monroe, the account manager. A guy in his 40s with a balding head and a tie that screamed, "My wife picked this out." I sat down across from him, my palms flat on the desk. "I need to close our joint account," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Transfer everything to my personal savings." David raised his eyebrows. "Everything?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Every dollar." Within minutes, it was done. I watched the numbers shift from one screen to another. Over $58,000, gone from ours to mine. It felt cold, but I had no choice. When I got back in the truck, I sat for a moment, staring out at the passing cars. I thought about the vacations Ashley and I had taken. Destin Beach, Blue Ridge Mountains, and how we saved every extra dollar for our future. Well, that future was gone. She had burned it to the ground. I was just making sure she didn't get the ashes. Next stop, Martin and Crane Law Office, a firm over on Kingston Pike. I chose them because they had a reputation, quiet, efficient, and ruthless. Inside, I met with Jennifer Crane, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-50s with short gray hair and a firm handshake. Her office smelled of leather and old law books, and her diploma from the University of Tennessee College of Law hung on the wall. "Chris," she said after I told her everything, "you've done half my work already. You have proof, photos, receipts, timelines. It's rock solid." She pushed her glasses up her nose. "Now, the key is to move fast and stay quiet. We file the papers immediately, but we don't serve them until you're ready." I nodded. I don't want her to see it coming. She doesn't deserve a warning. Jennifer's eyes flickered with something that felt like approval. "Understood. We'll handle everything discreetly. Now, let's talk about your assets." I spent the next 2 hours going through every detail, what we owned, what we shared, and what was mine alone. That's when I told her about the trailer. "It's in your name only?" she confirmed, tapping her pen on her legal pad. "Yes," I replied. "Bought it before we got married. Paid it off myself." Her eyes sharpened. "Good. That's leverage." That night, I sat on the couch across from Ashley. She scrolled her phone, laughing at something I couldn't see. She had no idea that by morning, everything in her world would start to unravel. The next day, I called Jim Daniels, a local realtor I knew through my buddy Derek. Jim was the kind of guy who could sell water to a fish and close a deal before you finished your coffee. "Chris," he greeted. "Long time, man. What can I do for you?" "I want to sell the trailer," I said bluntly. "Quick and quiet. No listing, no showings. Find me a buyer who's ready to sign yesterday." Jim didn't miss a beat. "Got a family looking for something affordable. They're pre-approved and want to move fast. You sure about this? I glanced around the living room, the framed photos on the wall, the couch we picked out together, the little shelf where Ashley kept her books. My gut twisted, but I forced it down. Yeah, I said, my voice cold. I'm sure. 2 days later, I signed the paperwork in Jim's office. The buyers, Tom and Rebecca Campbell, a young couple with a little girl, shook my hand. They were excited. First home. New start. We'll take good care of it, Rebecca said with a warm smile. I nodded, managing a small one back. I hope you do. After that, I started closing every door Ashley might try to walk through. First, the storage unit, where we kept our keepsakes and some furniture. I drove straight to Cherokee self-storage, changed the lock, and updated the access codes. That space was mine now. Every box, every photo album, every piece of furniture. Next, I redirected all my mail to a P.O. box across town. No more shared deliveries. No more surprises. I even called Verizon and split our cell plan. New number for me, no traceable line. By the end of the week, the life we had built together wasn't just cracked. It was dismantled, piece by piece. And she hadn't seen a single warning sign. The final cut was at First National, where I closed our joint credit cards. I left $100 in the account, just enough to keep it open so it wouldn't trigger an alert. But she wouldn't be able to spend another dime in my name. That night, I sat alone in the house that wasn't ours anymore. The trailer wasn't mine either. I'd sold it right out from under us. But Ashley? She didn't know. Not yet. I felt hollow, like I'd been scraped clean from the inside. But there was something else too, resolve. She had made her choice. Now I was making mine. And the next time she looked around this house, it wouldn't be there. Ashley's suitcase thumped against the front step as she pulled it to the truck. She had her phone pressed to her ear, barely glancing my way. Yeah, I'll be there by 6, she said, her voice tight with fake urgency. Tell them to hold my seat. She hung up and finally looked at me. 3 days in Atlanta, she said, brushing her hair back like she was in some commercial. Conference thing. Lots of networking. She smiled thinly. Don't miss me too much. I forced a chuckle. I'll manage. Her lips brushed my cheek. Cold. Meaningless. She tossed her bag into her white Camry and pulled out of the driveway without a second glance. I stood there, hands on my hips, watching her taillights disappear down Cherokee Lane, dust rising in the evening sun. The rumble of her engine faded, and with it, so did the last thread of our life together. I didn't waste a second. My truck, the silver Dodge Ram 1500, was already packed with everything that mattered. Clothes, tools, photos of my parents. My grandpa's old Winchester rifle was wrapped in a blanket behind the seat. I wasn't coming back. The trailer was already sold. The deal closed. The new owners, Tom and Rebecca Campbell, were set to move in. I had their number in my phone. They'd be here with a moving truck by morning. I walked through the trailer one last time. The living room, where Ashley and I spent lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and the TV humming softly. Gone. The kitchen, where she used to dance barefoot while cooking spaghetti, making me laugh so hard I couldn't breathe. Gone. The bedroom, where we once whispered dreams about growing old together. Gone. All of it. Ashes of a life that was never what I thought it was. I took one last look at the framed photo on the shelf, our wedding day. Her eyes, my smile, promises made and broken. I left it there. It wasn't mine to keep anymore. I locked the front door for the last time and slid the keys into a small envelope. On the front, I wrote, Tom and Rebecca, welcome home. I taped it to the door. The sun dipped below the trees as I climbed into my truck. The rumble of the engine felt final, like a gavel hitting the bench. Gravel crunched beneath my tires as I rolled away from the place I had called home. But I didn't look back. I drove straight to the Cherokee self-storage unit on Kingston Pike, where I'd stashed the last of my things. No shared memories, just my tools, my hunting gear, and a few boxes from my childhood. The lock was already changed. I'd done that 2 days ago. Ashley wouldn't have access, not that she'd even know where to look. Then came the last loose end, my mail. I stopped at the P.O. Box Center on Broadway. I had already redirected everything important, bank statements, bills, even my driver's license renewal. The old address wouldn't get a single letter from me. By midnight, I was on Interstate 75, the radio low, the road stretching into the dark. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, but I knew one thing for certain. Ashley would never find me. Ashley's return came 3 days later. The sun was blazing as Ashley's Camry crunched up the driveway. Her sunglasses flashed against the glare, and she barely noticed something was off until she did. Her smile faltered. The trailer was gone. All that remained was an empty lot, a patch of dirt and crushed gravel where her life used to stand. The oak tree swayed gently, the swing I built still hanging, but there was nothing else. No home, no truck, no me. She slammed the car into park and stumbled out, her heels skidding on the loose gravel. "Chris," she called, her voice sharp, panicked. She spun in place, eyes wide, mouth trembling. "Chris," she shouted louder, the wind stealing her voice. Her phone was out in seconds, her thumb hammering my number. Straight to voicemail. Her jaw clenched as she tried again. Voicemail. Her eyes flashed. She called again. Same. Her fingers flew to her contacts. She called my parents. "Mr. Foster? It's Ashley. Where's Chris? Do you know?" My dad's voice was firm but distant. "We don't know, Ashley." A pause. "And if we did, I don't think we'd tell you." The line went dead. Her face twisted in frustration. She tried my best friend. "Derek, where's Chris?" "I can't." "I don't know," Derek said flatly. "Haven't heard from him." A lie, but one he told without flinching. Her hands shook as she dialed 911, her voice tight with fear. The cop car arrived within the hour, a Knox County Sheriff's deputy with mirrored sunglasses and a clipboard. He stepped out, eyeing the empty lot and the shaken woman in heels. "Ma'am, you said your home is missing?" Ashley's voice was high and strained. "Yes. I've been gone for 3 days and it's gone. My husband is gone." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Gone how?" Ashley's face was flushed, her breath short. "I don't know. He's not answering his phone. His truck's gone. Everything's gone." She stopped herself, her chest heaving. "I want to file a missing persons report." The deputy scribbled down notes, his voice calm. "All right, ma'am. Let's start with the basics. Name?" "Chris Foster," she snapped. "My husband." "And the property? This was your residence?" "Yes, we lived here." "Ma'am," the deputy cut in, glancing down at his notes. "According to the county records, the property was sold." Ashley's lips parted. "What?" "The trailer. Sold legally. The deed was only in your husband's name." Her voice cracked. "That's impossible. It's our home." The deputy shook his head. "No, ma'am. It was his home. The deed was never shared. Sale was closed 2 days ago. Completely legal." Ashley's phone slipped from her hand and hit the gravel with a soft thunk. Her voice came out hollow. "He sold everything?" The officer's eyes softened, but his tone stayed professional. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It appears so." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above her. The swing creaked, its old ropes groaning under the breeze. Her knees buckled slightly, and she steadied herself against the car. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out everything but the realization crashing over her. Chris was gone, and he had taken everything with him. The Campbell's new pickup sat in the driveway where my trailer used to be. The grass around the plot had started to grow wild, and the dirt from the moving trucks was still fresh. The air smelled like pine and dust, and the wind carried the faint creak of the swing I built swaying from the old oak. Ashley's white Camry crunched up the gravel drive, her tires kicking up small clouds of dust. She parked hard, leaving the engine running as she climbed out, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. Her eyes were sharp, her jaw tight. She looked ready for a fight. The front door opened, and Tom Campbell stepped out onto the porch. He was a stocky man with a beard and a warm smile that faded when he saw Ashley's expression. His wife, Rebecca, stood behind him, holding their little girl's hand. Ashley didn't waste time. "I'm looking for Chris," she said, her voice clipped and tense. "This was my house. Where is he?" Tom's eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his voice polite. "Sorry, ma'am. We bought this place from Chris. We don't know where he went." Ashley's hands balled into fists at her sides. "This was our home," she snapped, her voice rising. "I need to find him." Rebecca, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her expression cautious but firm. "He asked us to give you something if you showed up." Ashley's eyes flashed. "What?" Rebecca disappeared inside for a moment and returned with a large manila envelope. Her fingers gripped the edges like she wasn't sure if she should hand it over. "He said you'd come," she said softly, "and that this would answer your questions." Ashley snatched the envelope without a word. The thick paper was slightly creased, and her name, Ashley, was scrawled across the front in my handwriting. Her lips pressed tight, and she ripped the top open. The first thing she pulled out was a stack of papers, crisp and cold. Her eyes scanned the bold letters at the top. State of Tennessee. Filing for divorce. Her breath caught in her throat. The pages were stamped and signed, dated 2 days ago. It was already filed, already in motion. Her eyes darted down the page, seeing her name and mine, the legal language spelling out everything in black and white. Irreconcilable differences. No contest. Sole property retained by Chris Foster. Her hand shook slightly, and the papers rustled as she turned the page. Next was a thick folder, its contents neatly clipped together. She opened it, and her face went pale. Inside were photos. Photo after photo. Ashley, with Brian Carter, at the Greenwood Inn, stepping out of her car, meeting him by the door. At the Redwood Inn, their hands brushing as they walked side by side. And then, at the Smoky Vine Steakhouse in Gatlinburg. Candlelight. Smiles. The bottle of wine. A receipt was taped to the page. Paid with our joint credit card. Her signature right there in ink. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her pulse pounding in her ears. She flipped faster, seeing the timestamps, the surveillance shots. Every lie. Every girls' night. Every work event. I had seen it all. I knew everything. Her lips trembled, but she kept turning. At the bottom of the folder was a single note, written by me. "Ashley, you lied. You cheated. And you spent our life to do it. Now, you have nothing. No home. It was never yours. The deed was in my name. Sold. Paid in full. Gone. No money. I closed the joint accounts. Every dollar you spent on him, you won't get back. No belongings, except what you earned. I left you what was yours. You'll find it in the bag. You always wanted something new. Now you get it. Goodbye, Chris." Ashley's face burned hot, and her fingers crumpled the edges of the paper. Her breaths were shallow, sharp, but her eyes were dry. Her pride wouldn't let her cry. She ripped through the envelope again, her hands brushing against the last item inside. A small duffel bag, folded flat. She recognized it. It was hers. Her gym bag. She yanked it open and found only a few things inside. Her high school yearbook, the one she refused to throw away. A sweater, her favorite old one from college. Her jewelry box, with a few cheap rings and trinkets. And a USB drive, labeled simply, proof. Nothing else. No clothes. No shoes. No photos of us. Nothing shared. Nothing from me. Everything else, everything we built together, was gone. Her fists clenched hard around the strap. She turned on Tom and Rebecca, her voice cracking with frustration. This can't be legal," she shouted. "He can't just take everything." Tom, his voice patient but firm, said, "Ma'am, the deed was in his name. We checked. The sale was clean. You don't own this land. And from what I see," his eyes flicked to the divorce papers still clutched in her hand, "he was within his rights." Rebecca's voice was softer but final. "I'm sorry. There's nothing here for you." Ashley's chest heaved, and she felt the heat rising behind her eyes, but she swallowed it down. She wouldn't break here, not in front of strangers. Her fingers curled around the papers and the bag as she turned sharply and stalked back to her car. She yanked the door open, her hands trembling against the leather steering wheel. The engine roared to life, but for a long moment, she didn't move. She sat there, the air thick and heavy, her hands gripping the wheel so hard her nails dug into her palms. The swing creaked behind her in the wind. The house she called home was gone. The husband she betrayed was gone. And the life she thought she controlled was gone. The wind whipped dust across the lot as Ashley's tires skidded onto Kingston Pike, her Camry's engine growling under the pressure of her lead foot. The envelope with the divorce papers and the proof of everything sat crumpled on the passenger seat. Her hands gripped the wheel, her heart hammered, her mind racing with a single thought. I need a lawyer. She pulled into the lot of Carver and Reed law offices, a brick building with faded shutters and a sign that had seen better days. She barely killed the engine before throwing the door open and marching inside. The receptionist, a woman with tightly pinned curls and reading glasses perched low on her nose, barely looked up from her computer. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? Ashley's voice came out sharp. No, but I need to see someone now. It's urgent. The woman gave her a cool glance. Our attorneys are booked. A door to the side creaked open, and a man stepped out, Jonathan Reed, mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and a sharp gray suit. He adjusted his cufflinks and glanced at Ashley with a flicker of curiosity. What's the emergency? Ashley's eyes burned. My husband filed for divorce. Her voice cracked. I need help. Now. Minutes later, she sat stiffly across from Reed in his office. The air smelled like coffee and old paper. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a brass clock ticked softly from behind the desk. She felt her heart racing as she slid the divorce papers across the polished wood. Reed adjusted his glasses and scanned the documents, his face expressionless. Your husband's lawyer is Jennifer Crane, he said, his voice steady. She's thorough. I've gone up against her before. She doesn't leave loose ends. Ashley's throat felt dry. But I have rights. This was my home too. He sold it out from under me. Reed's eyes didn't leave the pages. You're certain your name was on the deed? Ashley's lips pressed tight. Of course. We lived there together for years. Reed pulled out his laptop and opened the Knox County property records page. His fingers tapped the keys with practiced precision. Let's verify that, he said. Ashley's knee bounced under the table as the search bar filled with our address. A moment later, the record appeared. Reed's brow furrowed. He turned the screen toward her. Owner of record, Christopher Foster. Title status, sole owner. Sale date, recorded 3 days ago. New owners, Thomas and Rebecca Campbell. Reed's voice was steady but cold. The property was never in your name. Ashley's mouth opened, but no words came. Reed's eyes flicked up, sharp and direct. It was his property before the marriage. Paid in full. Your name never made it onto the title. He closed the laptop. Legally, you have no claim. The chair creaked under her as Ashley leaned forward, her voice rising. But we lived there together for years. How? Reed didn't blink. That doesn't matter in Tennessee. Separate property acquired before marriage remains separate unless it was retitled jointly. It never was. Her stomach dropped. Her voice cracked. But he used our money too? Reed shook his head. The sale was legal. He had full rights to do it. And since your name wasn't on the mortgage, you're entitled to nothing. The words hit her like a fist to the chest. She gripped the edge of the desk, her nails digging into the wood. Her voice was cold. Fine. Then what about our money? We had joint accounts. Reed opened his legal pad. Let's check your finances. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Do you still have access to your shared bank accounts? Ashley's heart pounded. She yanked out her phone, her thumb flying over the banking app. Her face drained. Balance, $0. Her voice cracked. He closed them. Reed's eyes flicked up. And your credit cards? Ashley flipped to the credit card app. Account closed. Her chest tightened. He took everything. Reed's voice stayed steady, a metronome against her rising panic. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state. But if the accounts were in both names, and he emptied them before filing, he paused. Then legally, he hasn't violated anything. Once the divorce papers are filed, the accounts are frozen. But he moved before that. Ashley's hands shook. So, what do I have? Reed's voice was clinical. You'll retain what's solely in your name, your personal bank account, your car if it's in your name, and any retirement savings under your sole ownership. Ashley's eyes darted to her banking app. Her personal account, the only one he hadn't touched. showed just under $1,200. Her voice came out hollow. That's it. Reed closed the folder. That's it. Her fingers gripped her phone. So, you're telling me no house, no savings, no joint accounts? Reed's lips pressed into a line. The accounts are closed. Your assets are separate. And from what I see in this filing, he tapped the divorce papers. The settlement's already proposed. He's not offering anything beyond what's yours. Ashley's voice rose, cracking under the weight of panic. But the marriage. Reed cut in, his voice firm but not unkind. He built his case with hard evidence, Mrs. Foster. And from what's attached here, he gestured to the dossier from my investigator, he has a strong hand. The office felt colder. The clock ticked louder. Her heart pounded in her ears. She had walked into this building thinking she'd fight for half. Now, she realized there was nothing left to fight for. Reed folded his hands on the desk. Legally, your options are limited. The accounts are closed, the property was sold legally, and the evidence. Well, let's say it leaves you little room for negotiation. Ashley's jaw tightened, but her voice was raw. So what do I do? Reed's eyes softened, but his voice didn't. You accept it, or you fight knowing you'll lose. The room was deathly silent. The clock on the wall ticked, steady and unforgiving. Ashley's fingers crumpled the divorce papers in her lap. She had nothing, and I had everything. The days after I vanished must have felt endless for her. The calls came nonstop at first, my phone buzzing every hour. Chris, please pick up. Where are you? Just talk to me. I'm sorry, please let's fix this. I never answered. Not once. Each message hit my phone like a rock against a closed window. Dull. Empty. Meaningless. By the second week, her tone changed. Angrier. Desperate. You think you can just disappear? You don't get to walk away like this. Then softer, cracked with something that almost sounded real. Please. I messed up. Just talk to me. But I didn't. Because some things don't deserve answers. I stayed with Derek in Chattanooga, a city I hadn't visited in years. His house sat on the outskirts, nestled in a quiet neighborhood not far from Lookout Mountain. He tossed me the spare keys and didn't ask for rent. Said, stay as long as you need. And that was that. I spent my mornings helping him with odd jobs, fixing fences, painting his porch, changing the oil on his black Chevy Silverado. Work that kept my hands busy and my head clear. But the nights, those were harder. I'd sit on his back deck with a cold beer, the sound of cicadas filling the thick Tennessee air. The stars felt closer out here, but peace felt farther away. I wasn't mourning her. I was mourning who I thought she was. A month passed. The calls slowed, but something in my gut told me it wasn't over. And I was right. It was a Saturday afternoon when Derek's truck pulled into the driveway with me in the passenger seat. We'd spent the morning picking up lumber at Tennessee Valley Hardware, and my shirt was stained with sweat and sawdust. That's when I saw it. A white Toyota Camry, parked right by the curb. My chest tightened, and my jaw set hard. I didn't need to see the plates. I knew. The driver's door opened. Ashley stepped out. Her eyes found me instantly, wide, red-rimmed, and full of something I couldn't place. Regret? Panic? Loss? Her hair was pulled back, her face pale and worn. She looked different, and not because of time, because of consequences. Derek stepped forward, his stance firm, protective. You're not welcome here, he said coldly. Ashley's voice cracked as she looked past him. Chris, please. I wiped my hands on my jeans, my throat tight. How'd you find me? Her lips trembled, and for a second, she looked away. I hired someone, a private investigator. I felt my fists clench, the burn of anger sparking through my chest. Of course you did, I muttered. Can't fix what you broke, so you pay someone to chase me down? She took a shaky step forward. Chris, I know you hate me. I know I destroyed everything. But please, her voice cracked hard. Please just talk to me. I felt Derek shift beside me, waiting for my call. But I shook my head. It's all right, Derek. He stepped back, but I felt him watching, ready if I needed him. I faced her fully, my voice cold as stone. Talk? What's left to say, Ashley? Her eyes glistened, her voice raw. I was selfish. I don't even know who I was. But I see it now. I lost you. I lost everything because I was too blind and too stupid. Her voice broke, and her hands shook as she wiped her face. You were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away. I let her speak, not because she deserved it, because I needed to hear it. Her voice lowered, tight with regret. I haven't been able to breathe since you left. I can't eat, can't sleep. She paused, her voice cracking. I'm alone, Chris. You took everything from me. But I don't care about the house, or the money, or, her voice dropped to a whisper, I just want you. The words hung between us, heavy and hollow. I felt my teeth grind. You want me? I said, my voice low. You didn't want me when it mattered. You wanted him. Her face twisted, guilt hitting her hard. No, it was a mistake. I felt my voice rise, sharp and raw. A mistake? I snapped. You didn't trip and fall into it, Ashley. You chose. Over and over again. Her chest heaved, her eyes pleading. Chris. I cut her off. You're not here because you love me. You're here because you lost. And now you want me to save you from what you did to yourself. Her knees seemed to weaken, and her voice cracked again. I swear, if I could take it all back. I felt my chest burn, but my voice dropped cold. But you can't. I pulled out the same folder, the one she had already seen. I opened it, flipping straight to the photos. Take a good look, Ashley. I spread them out, her with Brian, the motel doors, the dinners, the Gatlinburg receipt, her signature. Her face crumpled, and her hands flew to her mouth. Chris. My voice was low but sharp as a blade. You did this. She sobbed, raw and hollow. I was so stupid. I felt the heat in my chest boil, but then, cold, ice cold. I closed the folder, my eyes burning into hers. No, I said, my voice hard and final. You weren't stupid. You were selfish. Her lips parted, but I didn't let her speak. You knew what you had, and you destroyed it. I felt my breath steady, the final thread snapping clean. We're done. Her face shattered. Chris, please. I stepped back, and I closed the door. On her. Forever. Share your thoughts in the comments. Was it fair for Chris to take everything, or should he have left Ashley with something? If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.